So this is Folklore Rising. So here's the cover of the book, and I'll tell you a bit more about this actual painting later in the presentation. So let's start. So when you read the book, you will be presented with this image basically at the beginning, and this was a self-portrait that I made pre what I call now my druidic epiphany, and it was at a time that I was going through quite a dark period. I've had issues in my mental health and stuff in the past, and at this specific time, I was in a very kind of depressed, despairing kind of state, feeling quite lost as an artist, not quite knowing where I was going to go. Despite all this, around that time, my art had kind of kicked off. I was sacked from a job as a labourer on New Year's Day, and after that, I just had enough. I said, I'm not going back now. I'm going to be a full-time artist, and no matter what, I'm going to do it. So this was around that time, and I found myself up on Primrose Hill as I'd started taking these long walks through London, just to try and, find inspiration, try to reconnect myself and the city. And I ended up, like I say, one day on Primrose Hill, where I had this kind of moment standing up there where I felt I needed to capture it in some way. I didn't know at this moment in time that this was to become a kind of before painting, capturing a time before I'd had this kind of discovery of the British folk customs and things that I would later discover that would take me on this incredible journey. So at that moment in time, I was also doing portraits of things around London folklore. So I was on my way to Tower Hill to meet the Raven Master, who, for those of you who don't know, he's in charge of looking after the raven population within the tower walls, because the famous legend is if there's any less than 7 ravens at any time in the tower, that the country will fall and the crown with it. So I have to let my dog out. Who wants to get out? Go. So yes, so at that moment I'd come out of Tower Hill station, and in the distance I see this line of druids. At that point in time, I didn't really know what I was looking at, or was it a film set? I didn't know. So I ran over, and they assembled in this churchyard outside the All Hallows by the Tower, which is a remarkable church with incredible history that you can find out a bit more about in the book. And I listened to it, this ceremony, and there was talk of William Blake, there was talk of reconnecting with nature, the seasons, and that one day nature would reclaim London. And at that exact moment, when I heard all these words, it seemed to have this profound effect on me, where it like snapped me out of this dark period. It was like, it felt like I've got a new purpose, something to live for. And I went home and started looking up all these seasonal customs and rituals, and started getting out to them and, wanting to experience them firsthand. And this would then go on and inspire a whole series of paintings. But if you look on the left, you'll see there's also a painting of the autumn equinox ceremony. The one on the right's the spring equinox. So the equinoxes, as most of you will know, is the time of year between the solstices where night and day are of equal length. They're a time of balance. So that felt significant too. But as I mentioned, there I was, as you saw in the first slide, standing on Primrose Hill, and little did I know I'd be back there less than a year down the line on the Druid Order's 300th birthday, and seeing that same skyline, but with these druids kind of assembling down, which also felt like a serendipitous moment. So what I'm going to do now is take you, as you read the book, you have photographs as well. So it's not just all paintings, there's photographs, there's texts that tell you about my direct experiences and how these become paintings. So it's a bit of an artist memoir stroke journey through the ritual year. It's got quite a lot of layers going on to it. So I thought it'd be good to show some actual footage from some of the traditions that I'm going to. So I'm going to start with my next point. After I saw the Druids, I went to Cornwall to experience the May Day ceremony, which I will show you some footage of now. So this is the Padstow Obios. Oh, there we go. So this is a ceremony that takes place on May Day itself. where the whole town come out and celebrate the coming of summer. And this creature, this like hybrid hobby horse that started out like every other hobby horse, but in this specific town through their regional cultures and the things at the town that have, they were shipping ports around there. They've been going out to the new worlds and things. So there's a suggestion that this mask was brought back from Papua New Guinea, which is remarkably similar to other masks that you will see in Papua New Guinea. So as you'll learn in the book, there's a lot of interconnectivity going on, and I love the idea that regional culture mixes with all the different things that then come as time passes to create these hybrids, these fascinating traditions that you'll never find something similar anywhere else. They're just completely unique to the place, yet they still feel familiar, even though you've never experienced it. There's something profoundly human, and that's very much what the book is exploring, is our interconnectivity through our folk practices and rituals, and that DNA element where it feels natural, but then also that incredible never-ending source of creativity that you see within the different regions you visit, that brings this personality and uniqueness that makes the world such a great place, to be. So as I'm conscious of time, I'm just going to show a little bit of this. And now I'm going to go on to the painting. So this is my painting of the Padstow. So the one that I decided to depict was the most recent manifestation of the Padstow obios. And this is an obios that was created by the men after they got back from the Great War. So it was known as the Pesos. And one of the reasons that they did this was because a lot of locals felt, the more well-to-do locals, that the rowdy old Oss party were too drunk and disorderly, and they needed to create a more respectable Oss. But as times passed, both seemed just as drunk and disorderly as each other. But what I decided to look at in this painting was these two stories that were told to me most commonly. So I'll interview people, as you'll experience in the book, and then I'll take pictures and I'll come home and kind of process it and then create a painting based on my experiences. So one of the main stories was that during the French wars, that centuries of French wars, so I'm not exactly sure which one, but all the men were away fighting in Padstow. So the women saw a ship approaching on the cliffs, and a quick thinking local lady called Aunt Ursula, who you'll, if you hear the actual Padstow Obios song that's in there, the May song, and she would run up. She gathered all the ladies of the town, put on grotesque masks, and they dressed in whatever they could, and they went to the top of the hill and banged pots and pans. And apparently the French army ship fled, believing that there was a heathen army with a devil at its head. And then on the left, you see this reference to this Papua New Guinea folk tradition, the tuk-tuk dancers, or duk-tuk, I always get it confused. So you can see that kind of similarity in the mask. So it's quite possible that a sailor witnessed that in Papua New Guinea and thought, wow, we have a similar thing here. Why don't I bring and put that mask on? And if you look at the hat where it says OB, that is apparently meant to be the initials of the man that did that, a sailor called Octavius Branton, who there are records of existing, living in that town. So we're now going on to Castleton Garland Day. So this was pretty much my next point of call on my journey. And to see a man on horseback covered in a huge garland was just something that I knew I would have to paint. So let me just sort this out. So this is in the town of Castleton in the Hope Valley in Derbyshire, and it's like old mining towns. They used to mine stone from Blue John. They still do. You're in the Peak District, and this remarkable custom sprang up there with origins lost in the mist of time. But the story goes that it was a merging of maybe some older festivals, but the one that we see today was to represent when Charles II hid in the oak apple tree to evade the Roundhead rebel army from capture, which then meant when the monarchy was reinstated after Cromwell's 10-year period, as when the monarchy fell, that he was alive to become the monarch. So there was a nationwide holiday called Oak Apple Day, where you would wear these sprigs of oak and you'd be whipped and pinched and egged if you didn't wear, or rubbed with stinging nettles as well, if you didn't wear a sprig of oak to celebrate the king's reinstating to them as the monarchy. But here, so it would appear the man in Stuart costume is hiding in this oak apple tree. But then I also question as to whether, when Cromwell, took down the monarchy, a lot of the Puritans hated anything that they associated with paganism. So people got kind of clever in reinventing their folk customs to work with the modern times, which is what we see happening to this day. So at the end of the day, it's hoisted up and left to wither on the top of the church. So I'm just going to move on, again, conscious of time. So here is my painting of the Castleton Garden Day. So what I'm showing you now is what you'll experience in the book, the format. I go to the place, experience it, take pictures, then I come back, or I also interview people and I respond to that research and that experience in a painting. And in a painting, it does something that a photograph never can, where I think your internal experience kind of can't help but come out onto the canvas. So there's an added layer that I feel connects me to the time I was actually, the actual whole experience of being there. So as you'll see in this painting on the top left, there he is, Charles II hiding up in the oak apple tree. So Whittlesea straw bear. So this is a tradition that now exists in Whittlesea, Cambridgeshire, and another place called Ramsey, and also it's all across Europe, interestingly, versions of straw kind of bears dancing, always called straw bears. But this was apparently started by the ploughboys during the tough months of winter when there was no way of making money. They used to dance and parade through the streets and demand money with menace, as they say, by knocking on doors and with the ploughs threatening to mow up the bit of land in front of your house unless you gave them beer, money, or food. So I call this the kind of creativity of poverty. There's a lot of these types of traditions like mumming plays and things like that that seem to have stemmed from that kind of unemployment period. So the straw bear, there's a few stories going that I will now tell you through the painting. So this is my painting, the straw bear. So obviously on the left there, that's a reference to this idea of the ploughboys and mowing up the the lands on people's land. And then on the right, there's the speculation that when the dancing bears were outlawed in medieval times, that the straw bear was a replacement for that. So that's also quite possible. And then, as always, it's kind of based on experience. The sky, there was this moment where I was getting the train home and there was this kind of pink and green clouds that kind of just lasted for a few seconds. I'd never seen anything like it before. So this all comes together into how I kind of piece together pieces as an artist. So now we have the Abbots Bromley Horn Dance. So this is said to be the oldest of all folk dances in Britain. And the reason, sorry, oh, I'm just going to turn it down and then press play again. So this is said to be the oldest of all folk dances in Britain. And the reason for this is they've always said it, and people used to scoff at that, like academics and things. But one day, one of the horns was dropped and a little bit chipped off. So they thought they'd take this as an opportunity to get it carbon dated. And that was a kind of new technology when this incident happened. So they sent off this little piece to be carbon dated, and the year came back as 1064. And they weren't deer, stag antlers. They were actually reindeer antlers, and reindeer were long extinct by that time. So, when you think to that year, it was Norman conquest, Viking raids. It's quite possible that these horns are connected to some kind of Viking custom, or even just some kind of victory dance of, who knows. But the story that I was told was that it was to do with hunting rights, where it was like a way of mimicking deer to get closer to them, as well as a way of being recognized by locals as commoners that were allowed to hunt on the local aristocrats' land due to special privileges. There's also obviously the Viking story where the horns are coming over. So as you'll see in my painting, I kind of brought all these ideas together. This is a very strange moment in the day when you go to the Abbots Bromley Horn Dance, because you never normally feel this kind of class division. It all feels very much, from the earth, people. But here there is a family, the Bagot family, that apparently for centuries or decades at least have been supplying the lunch to the horn dancers. So they invite them in every year to dance on their lawn, and the commoners will stand on the other side of the wall outside, and then all the aristocrats and their friends will stand and watch from the inside. So it's quite a strange thing to experience. So this goes on all day, and then interestingly, with these pagan connotations, these horns, they're hung up in the local church where they're left for the following year before they're kind of collected. You can go and see them all year in Abbots Bromley, actually hanging in the church like a mini museum. So I'm going to move on now, again aware of time. They actually dance around me here. So so I will go on to my painting now. So here's the painting. So this painting's become quite a poignant piece for me because the first time I ever went to Abbots Bromley, I walked. You'll read the full story in the book, but I walked from the station, which is about 5 miles away, because there was no buses that I could find to get in. And I passed these big old cooling towers and this artificial reservoir. And I've been reading the stories about the idea of the Vikings bringing them. So I imagined this Viking ship, coming down this artificial reservoir. So straight away, on my way in, I started to piece this composition together. And then here on the left, you'll see this connection to the idea of hunting rites. And on the right, the dancers performing their dance. But the central figure, Jeff, who was a really lovely man, he's unfortunately now since passed away. And then, like all the cooling towers, or most of them in Britain now, the ones in the background have been demolished. So this painting, depicts, I think, the horn dance of 2019 or 18. I forget which year it was. I went quite a few times, and that landscape's already completely changed. So even when you're documenting things that you think will take years to become history, it happens a lot quicker than you think. Even with my film Frontline Folklore, that captures the pre-COVID ritual landscape. So that's already given the film significance. So it's quite amazing how quickly the world can change, and that's something that I've really observed. So now we're going to go on to I think this is the final bit of footage I'm going to show you, the Bury Man. So this is a custom that I seem to be a bit addicted to, that I want to go back every year. And again, I will turn it down. Apologies. So the Bury Man is a Scottish tradition, and it takes place in the town of South Queensferry, which is not far from Edinburgh. It's about 20 minutes on the Firth and Forth River, and you have the famous Forth Bridge. So this custom is pretty much evolved into a good luck custom. So the Bury Man will go around the streets during the day, dressed covered head to toe in these sticky burr seeds, these burdock seeds were the inspiration for Velcro. They're those sticky things that you get stuck to your dog on walks. And when he goes street to street, certain houses will come out and give him whiskey. He drinks a lot of whiskey in a day, and this is to ease the burden of his pain, of the scratching of the burrs, and the fact that he's so uncomfortable walking for miles on end without being able to go to the toilet, without being able to, sit down or even put his arms down. And in exchange, the locals will take a burr for good luck, and they'll put that often on their mantelpieces for the year. And it's become this superstition. But as I've spoken to, locals, the elderly generation there, I'll ask questions, about what they know about the Bury Man, and the story that seems to be the most common is that it was related to a herring fishing superstition. So all of this area on the coast of, on this coast of Scotland, there were fishing communities, often of herring, and apparently there was more than one Bury Man that in different villages and things. And it was this idea of taking the bad luck away. So if you're having a bad fishing harvest, the Bury Man would bring you good luck, and then take away the bad spirits, like a scapegoat. And then the fishing would go good, So he's had a lot of whiskey by now, as we all have. So this is towards the end of the day. And there's a final kind of emotional procession where the Bury Man will walk through the high street, right through the town, and he'll have a final few drinks on the way before being undressed, which in this instance is on a disco dance floor. but I'll let you see this before rushing through. So yeah, this is the moment. It almost resembles like sheep shearing because they tear it off, and you see him kind of almost like reborn as he comes out after performing this great collective, you know, act for the town to bring them prosperity and good luck. So here's my painting. So in this painting, I think what struck me the most about South Queensferry was the landscape that you're walking through and these old pebble dash houses. And there's something about the Buryman that makes sense when you see him walking through. It just feels like it just makes sense in that place, even though it's one of the most bizarre, surreal things you'll see. But there's something you can tell it's been born out of this town. You feel this connection. So I will move on now to tell you about. So, as mentioned in the introduction, I made a series of 20 paintings that are all about the seasonal customs of Britain. So, there's 20 examples that I gave you 4 or 5 there, I believe. And in 2021, we had just had the first lockdown, and we had planned this show, me and Simon Costin, the Museum of British Folklore. And obviously, it was a worrying time because we didn't know whether we'd be able to do it anymore because of lockdown and stuff. But somehow the stars aligned, and there was this period between the two where the show actually sat. So it kind of kicked off madly. And you have to bear in mind that I had approached about 100 different galleries, institutions with no luck at all. No one was interested in the show. And the general consensus was no one's really interested in this scene. They don't understand the value. It was basically dismissing it. And during the month we had this show on, there was 10,000 people that actually visited it in 1 month, or maybe more. And people were queuing around the street. It just really grew and grew. It was quite an amazing, life-affirming experience. So, as you'll see in the book, we go beyond my Frontline Folklore series. And when I finished that series and had that exhibition, I turned my attention to standing stones. And I'd watched a BBC program about Orkney, and in that there was suggestion that Orkney was the kind of birthplace of the cult of the standing, stone circle in Britain. So I thought that would be a great place to begin. And it was a weird time because I was exhausted after my exhibition. I wasn't quite sure where I was going to take my work next. So I just kind of went to Orkney not knowing what to expect. And I was just walking through that open landscape, which is just such a, whoever's here that's been, it's such a place you can really reflect, and there's a lot of space to think. So it was quite an amazing time. So as I went to these incredible stones, you've got the Ring of Brodgar in the background, and then the stones of Stennis. And these are part of a kind of complex. They all interconnect into this ritual landscape. So I started talking to locals in pubs. I heard that there was once a stone that had a hole in it called the Odin stone, where marriage ceremonies would take place by people putting their hands through, but through the hole, and it was a type of hand fasting, and then there'll be some kind of walk around the stones before going to the church to get married. So, and maybe pre-Christian, who knows if that was connected. I always like to think that these things, just they get, almost rebranded with the new belief systems. So anyway, this was like where my ideas starting to come together for how I could make paintings about standing stones that are in my style that connect to storytelling. Was that this stone was blown up by a farmer who was fed up of these couples trespassing on his land, who these stones once belonged to before it became, part of public land. So, so it was things like that, showing the spectres of the past and various stories of selkies and mermen and mermaids that you get. So I was just imagining it all happening at once, and that's often how I approach. There's a lot of stories with standing stones of maidens dancing into the Sabbath and being turned to stone for this sinful act. So there's all sorts of great stories that you start to hear around standing stones. But as always, I wanted to set it in the now. So these are all people that were there, looking at the stones, taking their selfies. So this was where a new kind of idea was born, you could say. Then the Devil's Den. So this is near Avebury on Fifield Downs, and this is like the capstone of an old dolmen, basically, that would have once been the entrance, perhaps, to a burial mound. And one of the local stories there is that the devil will appear every night and try and push the top stone off with the help of 12 white oxen and a rabbit that sits on top, advising him how to do it. So I was reflecting at the time on the way that COVID had influenced people's interaction with the British landscape. It was as if people had kind of re-fallen in love with their surroundings, with nature. It wasn't, no one could go abroad, and I definitely feel that this standing stone appreciation grew, you know, 10 times at least during that period. You know, Weird Walk, who's done a book with Watkins, they were already doing zines and things on this, but it was a bit like with my work as well, with the customs. There was something about that COVID period that changed people's relationship to Britain, in my opinion, and the way we perceive it. And people started to reflect on the good elements and the way that we can kind of re-fall in love with the landscape and look after our, you know, our own nature and our access to nature. So this is why I included these walkers in the background. And it was, the idea for the painting was it was as if they were talking about this story and it was kind of coming alive. And then obviously in the foreground, that, you know, just evidence that they've been there and had some lunch. Oh, and that the frog there, the angry toad, sorry, he will punish naughty children that run around. A good child can run around, I think it's 10 times or 7 times, and nothing will happen. But if the naughty child does it, this angry fire-breathing toad will I don't know exactly what it'll do, but attack you or something. So yeah, so this was the second painting I made in this. I was calling these Stone Lore around the time, and now the series has kind of evolved to just an overall title, Children of Albion. So this is, you know, a painting that I made that was inspired by a few sites in Britain. So you have the Sheelinagig from Kilpeck Church, which is basically a figure of some kind of feminine symbol of a woman exposing her vulva. And I started to link this connection of when I was going into like these burial mounds, like West Kennet Avenue, which is where this specific stones at the front were from. It's like you're going back into the earth, into the womb. So I like the idea of connecting these symbols from the British landscape into new hybrids, because we're kind of, that's kind of explains what it is to be British in some ways. We're all kind of mongrels of ideas that come and go, but interconnect, and obviously then have the green man symbol who's very much alive and kicking in places from, you know, churches, Norman churches, to garden centres, to, you know, he's everywhere when you start looking for him. And then I had this other idea of the Children of Albion, like it's almost become like a logo for the project, where you have the Cerne Abbas giant riding one of the Westbury White Horse in Wiltshire, you know, two iconic symbols of these hill figure tradition we have. But again, this idea of this mongrelization of them coming together to say something about what it is to be British. And then, of course, a stone circle. But there's obviously more all about this. I need to be careful because I don't want to tell you too much. You've got to buy the book. So this is the cover piece, which is the Dorset Ouser. So the Dorset Ouser is this mask that I'm sure many of you here are familiar with. And it was on the front of that iconic British Myths and Legends books. But you know, the version of it, which was photographed, that got lost, which is the original Ouser mask. No one knows what the Ouser necessarily originates in. There's stories that he could have come over from European traditions, because you see a lot of these kind of monster type figures in like Slavic countries, and you know, I was in Bulgaria and I saw quite similar things. But then there's also this custom that used to take place, charivari, or rough music, where before we had, you know, our police force established, there was a kind of mob justice that would take place in towns where people would be driven out the town. And to do this, they did it in quite a ritualistic way, where they would often put people on the back of donkeys, or they would, or even humiliate them by creating effigies of them. There'll be, you know, characters such as the Dorset Ouser just to add to the spectacle. So it's quite possible that he was part of some kind of charivari parade, and, you know, then ended up in an attic that eventually got woodworm, and now the mask is lost. But this is a modern version of it. So again, you know, my work's all about the way that stories mutate and evolve, and new generations bring alive old customs and this kind of interconnected humanness that we have in folk culture. So the reason that I wanted to have this painting, one of the most recent manifestations of the Dorset Ouzel, which was made by the founder of Blackthorn Ritualistic Folk, who's actually an incredible folk artist, makes absolutely incredible effigies and masks, and has inspired some work of mine. But also the Dorset Ouzel today, you will see a side that dance actually at the Cerne Abbas Giant in Dorset on May Day, and they have their own version. So it's very much a living, breathing tradition, this idea. So I thought that was the perfect fitting for the book to kind of summarize what the book's about. So this is the pioneers of what is now being known as Prog Morris. So Boss Morris, they seem to appear around the same time that I had my Druidic epiphany, should we say, about 10 years ago. And I noticed this group just doing things a bit differently, but also not really necessarily responding to the old tradition in a way that people would traditionally. It was like they were doing both. It was like 50% new and embracing kind of contemporary culture, and then also carrying on with the traditions of Cotswold dancing and responding to their landscape. So I really loved this idea of doing, this latest manifestation of Morris dancing. And they've obviously, as everyone will probably know, they've become quite iconic in the press and danced at the Brit Awards and all sorts of things like that. So this was on the day of the spring equinox. So this was kind of took you full loop for me, because I began at the spring equinox with the Druid order, and then I came full circle back to the spring equinox with Boss Morris. And this painting's all about balance, equal day and night, also feminine energy in the landscape, and this idea of Mother Nature nurturing. So a lot of ideas were in here. So as we began with the last self-portrait, this is the last self-portrait which I did, which is basically explains what this series of works have done to me. It's kind of like renatured me, and I've become the Green Man. And it's like as if to say that I've found my own true nature, and the way that my art is part of me now, and it feels like it's as natural as living and breathing. It's just, I feel like I found my authentic voice. So in a way, this is a celebration of that moment where I saw the Druids on Tower Hill, as you'll see on the right, and then now today, through this journey, feeling like I've kind of rediscovered who I am, and a very healing journey, as you'll discover in the book. There's also other references on the left to where I live and where I'm from that you can learn about in the book as well. So let's look at the time. So we've got about 20 minutes left. So I think if we finish there, it's time for some questions. Well, I think I've never, for some reason, I'm always interested in like these like contrasting times of the day, those fleeting moments of like a beautiful sunset, and also then that period in between seasons like we have now, where you can feel, you just start to feel the autumn coming in, and that kind of more fresher, colder air and stuff. So I've always liked those kind of transitional times. And it was actually, I was really inspired early on by Northern Renaissance painting, and how they often depict these like shadowless worlds, where you have these kind of, they're very hyper real, but they're surreal, almost beyond real. And like you mentioned, another layer to that influence was actually spending a lot of time with these kind of practicing magicians and pagans, who would talk to me about this idea of in between the worlds, where you have the time of day where there's no shadows and the sun's not in the sky. And this is when they would perform their daily magic, because it's the most effective time. So I suppose from that, I thought maybe I can find some kind of magic in depicting this time of in between the worlds in my work. It was like just a period of such hope, just to be, not long before it, in this period where I felt like my life was spiraling out of control in this depressed state, and then to all of a sudden feel never more feeling alive and connecting to this human wheel of the year, I suppose. It just everything just felt so magic and interconnected, and all these strange moments of serendipity kept happening, which felt like signs. I think the magic of the pagans rubs off on you after a while. Yeah. So basically, I've known the Fat White Family for a long time, members of the band, because I was in a band called the Spivs in my 20s, and we used to play like kind of punk music, you could say. And they were in a band at the time called the Saudis. So we were always kind of known each other, and they then formed the Fat White Family, went off, and did their thing, and I hadn't really seen them in a long time. And then they got interested in my art, and I ended up painting a portrait of Saul, who's now Adam Chesky, who's no longer in the band. He's always been quite an interesting character to me. There's a kind of dark Crowley-esque vibe going on to him, and he seems to always have this cult air around him where people seem to want to follow him and stuff. So I found him quite an interesting character that fitted into what I was painting at the time. So I did this portrait of him, and then the band came to my studio just to hang around and stuff. And then later they approached me to basically help art direct a video. They had already got part of it planned, but like this idea of dragging a bag, and I was kind of brought in to create this idea of this procession that you see in the woodlands. And between us, we came up with all the characters. I went to see my friends at the Lions Park who do the October Plenty Festival, and with the Green Man of Bankside and stuff, and they supplied us with all the outfits and stuff, as well as making outfits. So it was yeah, it was a really great experience doing it, in the haunted screaming woods. And that was, I invited Boss Morris to be in that video. Yeah, it was before um, this new kind of almost movement that we have of people re-engaging with folk culture and being inspired by it had got to this point. But it was like the early signs where I could tell, wow, they're getting interested. I just started to see more and more people connecting to the subject matter. So it worked really well, I think, because it felt really fresh and exciting to bring all our worlds together. That band also have their own kind of mythology that they created by living on the edge of society in a way, and they've got all these moments that have happened throughout their career. So it was quite fun to like create their own personal folklore in that video, I think. And that's what the director Fiona Gadivia kind of was doing. I think that was the aim and why they got me in. Yeah, really accessible. I think that we project our fears of folk horror onto a lot of these things. So we're all like, you know, we're all still disturbed by the Wicker Man. So like, you can't, when you see someone burning a straw effigy, you're not going to feel too welcome, are you? The reality is, no, everybody's welcome. And the straw bear of Whittlesey is an absolutely mad, incredible day where you have the whole town full of Morris dancing, the bear processing all through the streets, and it's a very open, welcoming environment. There are some customs that aren't so welcoming, but it's not like you can't be there. It's just like, don't get too, you kind of have to assess it. I'm there with a camera taking pictures in people's faces, so I'm bound to get in a bit more trouble than a spectator just standing on the edge. There is a bit of that, but there's also a kind of sorry to interrupt. There's also a kind of rite of passage element to your, like if you're just there watching it, no one's really batting an eyelid. But if you're there as an artist, they know you're up to something, so they want to know what your intentions are. Are you going to be, for these people? I really get it, to be honest, as you probably read in the book. It's so important to these people. So, and then you get some artist from London there taking pictures, talking to everyone. They're going to be thinking, what the hell is he doing? What's his intentions? Is he trying to humiliate us? Because you do get these people writing down, don't you, on these folk traditions, like it's like peasants with their silly superstitions. So but when they realize you're there with the same kind of outlook, you could say, and also there just to enjoy yourself, I think that people start to come round. So some of these bouncer type characters get a little bit more lenient each year you go. For example, the last time I went to Padstow 2 years ago, one of the main guys that like brings the oss out of the stable, he finally sat down and gave me an interview. That took 8 years to get that privilege, you know. So you have to earn your trust. I feel guilty for not going back to some, but you know, at the same time, I can't. You know, I've got to look to new things for new work. But a part of me would just love to just spend the rest of my life going to the same things over and over again, a bit like Doc Rowe. But unfortunately, it's not going to quite work for me. Exactly. So Blake's followed me around my whole life, really. Like, I remember as a kid, my dad lived in Shoreditch near Bunhill Fields, and I would see his gravestone and think, who's this Blake character? Then you'd see plaques around. Then I was working in Carnaby Street as a teenager, just selling clothes in the mod shops, and it's, you know, when it was all those kind of shops you used to have, and sit on the stairs of Blake House, where his childhood home once stood, where he had his first vision of God at age 4. So I got really interested in the work of William Blake, and then I kind of forgot about Blake in some respects when I was like going through my depressive period and in bands and stuff. Um, and then all of a sudden, there I was on Tower Hill, and I heard his name being read out as a member that was once one of the, you know, yeah, there we go. So I was going to get, yeah. So yeah, so that, you know, Blake was part of the story, and I was, you know, revisited his art, and he's been a big inspiration, and I'm really inspired by his idea of just existing in his own world. You know, I kind of exist in my own strange space outside the art world. I don't really know where I am, but I just do my thing. Um, it's that idea of not waiting for the authority to give you a living. You can kind of get out and just do it. Um, and that I get that from Blake without doubt. But then on top of that, I had, you know, I read about William Stukeley in that painting you showed. So William Stukeley was at Rollright Stones. He was an antiquarian responsible for bringing interest to like Avebury and saving a lot of the stones. That, you know, a lot of people say without him, Avebury would be just a housing estate now, you know. So he had an epiphany that reminded me of my druidic epiphany, where he was at Rollright Stones and he thought that these were pre-Christian temples, Roman. He thought at the time. He was slightly wrong, but it was a first thought that these stones were pre-Christian. And then later, Blake would have an epiphany, seeing the work of Stukeley, where he would want to connect to these druidic times and all this kind of stuff. So there was this lineage, and I feel through that painting, I was trying to explain this lineage that I feel connected to Blake, and I feel connected to Stukeley in this line of people, in almost this kind of occultish line of serendipitous weird moments that all feed into each other, I think. So yeah, a big connection. And I'm now, you know, doing a painting called Children of Albion, where I'm looking at creating my own almost mythology around Britain and things. So yeah, huge influence. The King. Amazing. That was the first book I bought on the subject. So I literally, that was like a Bible to me. I was following her journey in a way, you know, trying to get to these places that she had been. And then from there, my own journey springboarded. So that was a very important book. And also, I like the way she approached it with this kind of generosity to the local people, where it was very lovely written. And I just liked her approach. She felt like the pictures made you feel like you were in it, rather than like someone at the edge taking it in a kind of like Cecil Sharp kind of, and you know, separation way that he's studying the people. It didn't feel like that. So, and that was very much an approach that I took. Obviously, Homer Sykes, his book, and he's got a new one. His work's just incredible, and that was a book that was really inspiring to me. Um, then obviously William Blake's The Complete Works has been a big inspiration. But I'll tell you a book that really influenced me was the Charles Frigier photography book of Wilderman. Have you ever come across that? Where he basically did it, he's still doing it now. He goes around the world capturing the costumes from rituals and things. And he did one around European traditions that I kind of got when I was researching photo. I bought that book, and I think if you look at the way he composes his pictures in photography, there's I definitely took from that in the way I compose my paintings. And then obviously Hieronymus Bosch is a huge influence on how I compose my paintings, and this idea of hybridity. It's not always as well like necessarily books on folklore that have inspired me, because I'm more like picture led and research led. So I like to just get out. So religious art has been really inspiring to me. The way that stories get told around biblical stories, and I look to them for like almost like storytelling techniques in my works. So yeah. My personal belief is, the church lies at the heart of a community, so it's going to make sense for that's where seasonal customs will be taking place. But I think this idea of Christianity wiping out an old way of life isn't perhaps the way it quite worked out. Because when you go to say like Norman churches like Kilpeck, and you'll see that Sheen in a gig, you'll see all these like pagan deity type symbolism. I think my guess is that the Christian faith system rebranded an existing faith system and replaced multiple gods with saints and things like that. But I think a lot of these practices and superstitions would have lasted amongst the common folk, and then they would have, I think somehow it just all merged into one bizarrely British combination of all the ages. So I think that this idea that Christianity, when you look at the Catholic religion, there's a lot of rituals around Catholic. It was actually more the rise of when you had Henry VIII, obviously creating the Church of England, but then also when you had Cromwell, there's these moments in history where they were trying to get rid of the lavishness and the decoration and stuff. And I think that was more the point where these things were more oppressed, because they were like with associated pagan origins. But I don't think that really bothered people as much as people think until Victorian times, when they tried to stop everything. Yeah, absolutely. So as you'll see at the back of the book, there's my folklore activist manifesto, which very much deals with this. It's like when I describe my own personal journey, I felt like kind of fully urbanized, no longer connected to nature. I wouldn't have been thinking about nature, or, you know, how to look after it or anything. I think for most people in the country, nature, worrying about the environment is just making sure you're putting the right stuff in your recycling bin. There isn't like this genuine connection. So I think that when you actively go out your way to revisit these folk traditions, and also bring these stories alive, they connect communities through their shared heritage. That's kind of free of the nationalistic one size fits all, which is quite repulsive to some people. New generations that don't want to be associated with that empirical past. And you can then, because of the impact of that association, you can then reject England, reject the land, and then not care about your own land, which is kind of lazy. So I think I did that a bit, to be honest with you, because I felt not connected to what it was to be British for a while. But then by connecting with the seasonal customs and then communities of in regional cultures, you start to kind of really fall in love with the country, not for its similarities, but for its diversity. So all of a sudden, you're looking at the environment in a different way. You're worrying about uh, the land in a different way, the access to the land, and so I think it psychologically it's a huge shift in the way you think that can only have positive repercussions on the way people then navigate themselves in the world. Well, it's just knowing your own landscape and being part of it in a way inspires you to look after it. You know, you can't really look after land you're not familiar with, and you don't really care about land that you're not familiar with. So I just think the idea of communities coming together, connecting together, celebrating their boundary, like you say, a lot of them are in kind of boundaried areas. There'll be processions that mark out things. It just has a psychological boost, I think, to communities, and they're going to definitely have this activist element where they're going to want to look after their towns. They want to look after the natural environment around them. I just think it can only really inspire positive things. I really do. But I think that's like I was talking about earlier. People had time to sit down and really think about perhaps the impact it's having. Obviously, it's quite a shocking sight when you first arrive. But at the same time, when I was first going, and I was so caught up in the magic of folklore, this coal mining story and Moorish pirates and stuff. So I think I was just immersed in that, if I'm honest. And then one of the one of the things that really strikes you about Bacup is it's a rundown town to an extreme level. The people are very, have been through a lot of hardships, and they are of it. So that element when you're there does make you feel quite different to actually just seeing these kind of images out of context. But I would like to see, I feel like it needs to move on to evolve, and it would be nice to see perhaps just a simple shift in the color of the face paint that doesn't offend anyone. I just think that it seems very important at the heart of the community. So, and they now they can't take part in other communities. They can't go and visit them because of the Morris Ring has, put a stop to the use of blackface within their event. So it's like they've isolated themselves, and that I don't really know if that's what it felt about when I first went there. It was more of a sharing thing. So yeah, I just got to a point with this blackface thing where it I'm not really interested in the origins anymore. I just feel like we just need to move on, you know. And there's so much great stuff about folklore, and it can just muddy it. It can bring out some of the the more darker sides. And is it is it something that needs to carry on? Well, like I'm already exploring Bulgaria and thinking about branching out to some more European countries to start with. But for me, the magic of folklore is, for example, I talk about a new sense of pride within your own country. But what I love about folklore is you have that, but then beyond that, those barriers, you become just proud of the world, of humanity and the creativity and our shared and collectedness, but also our individualism. And so like you say, I marvel at all the different practices around the world. It just makes the world such an amazing place to be. And the fact that in so many of these countries where folk culture has remained so at the heart, it's such a testament to the strength of people and the human spirit. The fact that in spite of these oppressive regimes, somehow these amazing human practices have survived. The things that keep us together, the things that keep us in line with the planet and the universe, even. So I'm just amazed by it all. It's inspired for life. Yeah, well, yeah, the concept was almost just to put you right at the front of it. One thing that I always think about being an artist as well is you have the luxury of like research and time being important. So I love the idea of being able to give someone the experience that they may not have time to experience. But then also, I think there's something amazing about um, being allowed to put yourself in a dangerous position, the freedom that comes with it. So I think that people buzz off this idea of one night a year, health and safety is out the window, and I'm gonna. And the phrase I often hear is, "We're taking back control of our streets." They always seem to say that in those more raw, like violent type of traditions. So I think there is a sense of like flipping the hierarchy, where they can be lawless for a day, a purge of some sort. Without doubt, that's the atmosphere you get. And it's like when you're a kid, you love it takes you back to childhood, that feeling of excited by danger and, you know, roller coasters or fires or fireworks, you know, things like that. Yeah. It's hard for me to like just pick one, to be honest. I liked so much. I what I really loved about traveling around the country was hearing just the local people singing in their authentic voices with their instruments. Because I'd been in this band, and it all kind of fell apart. I'd become a bit like almost fed up of music and the ambition around music. So there was something so like appealing about just people picking up guitars, singing, and you'd hear some incredible stuff. Like, so I really do love just looking for like interesting recordings of rural singers and, you know, all things like that. But obviously I also love a lot of the modern folk singers around at the moment. Elspeth Ann is one of my favorites. Angeline Morrison's making some really interesting music. I've always loved that Magpie song by the Young Thanks. That really encapsulates something about folklore and Britain and the magic you feel around it. Yeah. I think my definition in a way though of like the paranormal would be this feeling that you're like interconnected, that you have these moments where like time dissolves and you feel this connectivity. um it's like tapping into a different type of consciousness, and that happens a lot. But then there are some like pretty mad experiences, like, you know, I had this druidic epiphany um on Tower Hill, and then a few years later I've done the summer solstice, stayed up all night, go to bed in a B&B. I'm just about to get the coach home, and something in my head just seems to tell me, "Oh, you haven't seen Stonehenge properly before. You need to see it without people." So I go to the visitor centre, like look at the museum and stuff, and then think, "Oh, I better jump on the bus." Jump on the bus that takes you up to the hill. The second I step foot on the ground, I look up and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was the London Druid Order in a line at midday again, without me even knowing it. And they have access to the stones to perform their own private ritual. So that just felt like, wow, this is kind of magical. And there was a time when I was walking back from that solstice where I do remember feeling like I hadn't taken drugs, but my consciousness was like in a weird like state. It was like I was in a different consciousness, almost like I was like imagining a hair run out, and then this hair runs out, and just it did. Yeah, I felt like I was like somehow in some different magical state of consciousness, and I think that does happen. Yeah. So online, you've got my website www.benedge.co.uk, where you can watch my film free in the film section. You've got my Instagram, where is mainly news and just inspiration and updates. And then also there's some more events coming up. Tomorrow in Brighton at the Family Store. There's going to be a party celebration around the book. Monday, unfortunately, this is sold out, but at the Fitzrovia Chapel, we're doing a London launch. And then I think it's on the 20th at the Dartington Trust, or 19th. It's just down in Devon. I'm doing an event down there. So there's a few things coming up. And also I'm in the process of arranging some more things. So just keep an eye out. My mailing list is a good thing to sign up to, where you'll get all the news, which is via my website. Bye. Bye-bye. See you. Bye. Bye.